Hello, I'm Lissant Bolton. I'm the Director of the Endangered Material Knowledge Program and also at the same time, the Head of the Department of Africa, Oceania and the Americas at the British Museum. This video is just a short introduction to the Endangered Material Knowledge Program and a kind of welcome to it. So welcome to you who are watching. Just a bit of background about me and why I might be the director of the Emkp. I'm an anthropologist and I work in the Western Pacific. My research is in the Western Pacific, especially in an island nation called Vanuatu. I went to Vanuatu initially at the invitation of the Vanuatu government to assist with a cultural documentation program, documentation and revival program at the museum or cultural centre in Vanuatu. And my role in that over the last 3+ decades has been as a kind of facilitator and supporter of documentation and revival that people in Vanuatu wanted to do. They speak 130 different languages in that one small nation, and so there's a great deal of knowledge and practice there. At the same time, my own research has supported and funded some of that, and that research has always paid a lot of attention to objects because I am really interested in what we can learn and understand about objects. So Emkp is called the Endangered Material Knowledge Program. So what is material knowledge? And the answer is that material knowledge is a shorthand term that refers to all the breadth and depth of knowledge that people have, or that is linked to or discoverable through objects. And in that sense, objects are a kind of a door, a point of access to understanding things about social life that we might not otherwise be able to discover. So let me just share my screen to entertain you slightly. So objects are a really unexploited research resource. They're a really unexploited way of learning about and understanding human life, human skill, human knowledge, human ability. So documenting objects involves learning how they are made and mended, as in these photographs, how they are used and when they are discarded. Objects can also point to other aspects of social life, to cosmology, to ideas about value, what's important, what isn't, to ideas about kinship, who is related to who and how is that relationship expressed and conveyed, to the environment, to climate, to weather, on and on and on. There are so many different things that we can access and learn about through looking and paying attention to objects. Objects can also be highly personal. They can be access points into learning about an individual's own life and trajectory. And of course, they are used and referred to as metaphors, as similes, and in other ways in proverbs, in songs, in poetry and other verbal arts. And objects are also, material knowledge rather, is much more than just the kind of things that might be collected for a museum. It's not much more than what you might think of as a kind of material culture in a museum sense. Objects, material knowledge involves a whole spectrum of material forms, from architecture through landscape modification, for example, in making gardens or managing gardens, in food and eating, and also in the disposable. So on the left-hand side of the image you're looking at, there's a woman preparing a fish to be cooked, wrapped in leaves. So the leaf is a transient, ephemeral form of material practice that is important in terms of material knowledge. So there are lots of different kinds of ways in which, in fact, there are so many different kinds of ways that you can hardly think, it's really hard to think of anything that people know that isn't linked in some way or another to material knowledge. So the next question is, where does the word endangered come from? What do we mean by endangered? And that's a kind of difficult thing because it's always quite fashionable, especially in anthropology, to think that what people do now is what's interesting and that's what we need to pay attention to and respect, and not think about what they might have done or might have thought in the past. But nevertheless, there are a lot of pressures on long-standing forms of knowledge and practice in different parts of the world. And I myself have had quite a strong sense of that in Vanuatu, because the women, I particularly work with a group of women from across the country, women who told me things 20 years ago that I remember. I have found in a number of instances that they themselves are no longer particularly thinking back to that form of knowledge because their own lives have moved on. The pressures come from many different sources. They come from population increases, from climate variation, from wars and disasters. Material knowledge is at risk from the impact of global trade in goods, from plastics to secondhand clothes. And all the skills and the knowledge involved in making and using things tend to be gradually forgotten when people stop using those things. So one of the things I have also learned is, over many years, is that when you document objects, that often has the effect of making people interested in them again, or drawing their attention even to the fact that those things are in danger of being lost. And so it often results in people paying attention to and making sure that knowledge about something is retained. So this is not a program that supports revival projects per se, but we see the effect of documentation on people's lives can be, in effect, to retain things, especially to transmit information to children that they might not otherwise know. So why was Emkp established? When was it established? It's a new program, actually. It was established in 2018, and it's founded by Arcadia, a private foundation of Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Bolton, which supports the documentation and preservation of what is endangered in a very broad sense, including languages and archives, and also in another stream of what they do, including things like in the different environmental aspects of the environment. The fund supports the Endangered Languages Documentation Program at SOAS, School of African and Oriental Studies in London, and also the Endangered Archives Program at the British Library and others. So they have a model of giving grants to a body that then gives grants, and that's what Emkp is. And we are, I must say, extremely grateful to Arcadia for enabling us to develop Emkp and thus to support the kind of research that we think is so important. Our own conviction that documenting material knowledge is important has also been more than borne out in the responses that we have had to the program so far, in the applications we've received, in the grants that we've been giving, and in some of the research that's been completed. So that's terrific. The interest is terrific. It's also really important to me to say that the program is based on the concept of collaboration. In some cases, our grantees are documenting their own material knowledge, but in all cases, we emphasise an open and informed approach to documentation. We are wanting to work with people in the strongest sense, and to respect the constraints that they have in relation to their own knowledge and information. So one might also ask, why have this at the British Museum? And the answer is that the British Museum is an institution that takes a global perspective on the material world, and that has also often collaborated with communities around the world on different kinds of documentation projects. The Emkp is not about only, or even specifically, documenting museum collections in any museum, let alone the British Museum, but that is a really useful way sometimes of drawing people into thinking about and talking about objects. Photographs of objects in museum collections, historic photographs, are great documentation tools. They can stimulate memories and histories. So where possible, we give photographs of objects in the British Museum that are relevant to a project to a grantee, because what people say about historic objects, while it might not be what the original users might have known or said, it may nevertheless be extremely important. So to conclude, I'd like to say we're really delighted by the way Emkp has been developing in the last few years. We have a great staff team, great grantees, great applicants, great panel. We're very happy with the way it's developing, and particularly I'm extremely glad to think that we have an opportunity to document sometimes very humble and simple things that people know that are actually incredibly important. And there's so much that we have yet to learn. So it's terrific. So thank you.